Well, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning. I'm very honored that Victor and the organizers of this prestigious conference have asked me to deliver a short speech on the EBRD's perspective on Ukraine's transition progress in recent years. Only a few weeks ago, many of us actually who are here today were gathered in London to hear Ukraine actually report on its achievements in pushing through reforms. We pledged in London our continued support for Ukraine. And the fact that so many of us who turned out in London are also here today is I think, a tribute to the scale of the goodwill that Ukraine has from the international community. Now, the EBRD has been at the forefront of that support. We've been investing more in Ukraine since independence than any other organization. And when and where appropriate, we've also sung the country's praises as loudly as any other well-wisher, if not more so. And as good friends should, I think, we've also not been shy of offering advice when we perceive reform setbacks. Now, my earnest hope for the months ahead is that we can help Ukraine achieve much more progress in the areas which will have the most impact on its people and on the country. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine, for me, is today a nation that is on the road to transformation. Only a few years ago, in 2013, we at the EBRD had stopped investing in the public sector, and our private sector clients were suffocating in the most hostile of environments. Today, the landscape is quite different. That's certainly a cause for celebration. Much important groundwork has been done. The country is benefiting from macroeconomic stability, and growth, of course it's still too modest, has returned. The situation in a number of areas is really changed. Take public procurement. It bears no comparison with what was going on before. But with that groundwork now in place, attention, of course, shifts to the building out of the larger structure, one which will really deliver sustainable and robust economic growth in the future. Now, we at the EBRD, we take great pride in Ukraine's successes. We've been very, very vocal in our enthusiasm for the efforts of Ukrainian governments to undo what I would call years, yes, years of half measures, years of missteps, and years of neglect of the economy, of the basics of good governance, and of the business climate. And as I said, we don't hesitate to challenge the country's leaders to be much more ambitious and more dynamic when we see momentum flagging. We do so very much, of course, as allies in a common cause. And that's the spirit in which I will want to offer advice as to where the priorities lie in the months ahead. Very quickly, let me just tell you what the EBRD has already achieved, though, on the ground here in Ukraine. Now, in many ways, our record here exemplifies the EBRD mission at our creation. Our creation was at the very same year that Ukraine gained its independence. The EBRD mission is to develop open and sustainable market-oriented economies and promote private and entrepreneurial initiative. We're the largest single investor here. The cumulative figure currently stands at around 12 billion euros. That sum actually includes almost 3 billion euros over the last 3 years alone. Our commitment, whether it's in the form of investment or technical cooperation or policy dialogue, has been substantial. I should also, of course, mention here that our role in managing around 2.5 billion euros in donor funds dedicated to safeguarding the site at Chernobyl, and the 715 million euros of that has come from our own resources. Now, signs of activity are frankly everywhere in the country and touch many sectors. You can't even travel to Kiev from the EU by road, for example, without using the motorway which EBRD financed. Indeed, I gather from my Ukrainian friends that our highway maintenance program brought such welcome changes to some Ukrainian roads that it actually got star billing on TV under the title 200 Kilometers of Happiness. Now, also, very importantly, when Naftogaz needed financing, that's back in the fall of 2015, to buy gas and get through the winter, it was the EBRD that was the institution with the will and ability to support that. The expansion in EBRD activity over the last 3 years has led to the opening very recently of new offices in Kharkiv and Odessa. Both, of course, are supported by the EU through the EU4 Business Initiative. And we're already giving local SMEs the advice and support that they need. We're particularly proud, I have to say, of our role in helping to create the Business Ombudsman Council. This is a vital mechanism by which the private sector can register complaints about unjust treatment at the hands of the state or municipal authorities. The Council's work has already yielded a direct financial impact of almost 330 million euros, and that was just over a period of less than 2 years. But I'd also highlight what we've done to help transform the performance of Ukraine's civil service. This has always been a constraint on the country's capacity to pursue reforms. We devised the idea and championed the setting up of the reform support teams within key ministries. And we believe these teams will help with further implementation of those reforms. Now, ladies and gentlemen, reforms are, of course, not an end in themselves. They're the means to the ends that we all want for Ukraine. International financial institutions like the EBRD, we can be of assistance here, but there's only so much that we can frankly do on our own. If Ukraine is to enjoy inclusive and sustainable growth, the remaining barriers to investment, whether foreign or domestic, they need to be dismantled, and dismantled sooner rather than later. There's still a lot to do to improve and enhance the business climate. In fact, I would go further than that. Ukraine does not have the luxury of further delaying the reforms required to complete the foundations and build out the structure of the economy. Now, we talked about rates of growth. They're of course heartening after the experience of recent years. So actually are the statistics on the business sentiment. 86% of CEOs surveyed by the European Business Association expect significant positive growth dynamics in 2018. 15% of them plan on 20 to 30% revenue growth. And according to the American Chamber of Commerce, institutional investors now list Ukraine as their #1 new destination for 2018. Now that's great news. But as Ukraine's leaders would recognize, it's in no way is this enough, or indeed what Ukraine is capable of. Ukraine needs to do much more to consolidate the rule of law and respect for property rights, indeed everything that advances the struggle, the fight against corruption. This remains the single largest obstacle to the return of investment that's going to drive future growth. Progress on that front would be hugely beneficial for tackling the challenge of moving more of the parallel economy from darkness to light. We see signs, of course, that vested interests do begin to feel under threat, but they're pushing back. We also appreciate that reforms don't just happen of themselves. They're part of a political process. But at the same time, the achievements so far need to be preserved. They need to be built upon. Among them, bank supervision, discipline in the field of monetary policy, and continued momentum for change at Naftogaz. And of course, land reform. Land reform in Ukraine could unlock huge amounts of further funding for agribusiness. Ukraine would then make a decisive contribution to the food security of Europe and beyond once again. Now, these reforms still to come must be bold in concept. They've got to be pursued with determination. And the timeline for implementing reforms should not be held hostage to the electoral cycle. Because reform postponed is transformation postponed. In that regard, we encourage the government to make faster progress in privatization and reform of state-owned enterprises. Indeed, I think more than anything else, a series of successful privatizations would whet the appetite of investors for more Ukraine action. It would act as a genuine game changer in efforts to attract more FDI, and we will continue to help with this, but we do need political decisions to be made on this front. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine has a firm friend in the EBRD and the other multilateral development banks. I last pledged our continued support for the country and its people at that conference in London a few weeks ago. I do so again today in front of you here in Kiev. Our commitment to Ukraine has never been one of here today, gone tomorrow. Of course, the more tangible the progress in implementing change on the ground where it really matters, the more the rest of us can then do to invest in Ukraine's future. A lot has been achieved. Now is the time to rev up the reform engine, to give it real momentum. The promise of a better tomorrow for Ukraine is, I think, within our grasp. So let's reach out and let's seize it together. Thank you very much.